So we are in a series right now. If you were here last week, we started a series called Real Wisdom for Real Life. And it's a series that we are going to spend our summer in on the book of Proverbs. And we are going to spend this summer getting wise. Who's with me? It was a little less enthusiastic than I had hoped, but we are going to spend our summer. It's going to be broken up throughout. We're going to have some guest speakers. I'm going to be away and back, but we're going to spend a good chunk of the summer getting wise together as a church and learning what wisdom really is and what God has to say about it, and more than anything, how you and I can actually become wise people. And this series is all about real life and real practical situations and problems that we all face. And I want you to forget about this nonsense that you hear all the time, that the Bible is all high and lofty spiritual things and it has nothing to do with real life. Just read the book of Proverbs, because every chapter has dozens and dozens of things to tell you and me about how to live Monday morning. Don't let anybody tell you that the Bible is all high and lofty spiritual things, because it's all about everyday struggles and decisions that you and I face chapter after chapter after chapter. And last week we talked about the thing that we need to know before we become wise people, and this is what it is. In life, there are two paths that you can take, and there are two roads that you can travel. Do you remember what they are? There's the road of wisdom and the road of folly. That's right. Every one of us in this room is on one of those two paths. Every decision in your life, a major decision that you come against, you have a choice to take a path that's called wisdom and a choice to take a path called folly. And we talked last week about how when you and I are going about our everyday lives and we are just doing the thing called life, we are walking down the road, we are hearing two voices calling us in two different directions. When you're faced with difficult decisions, you're hearing a voice on one side called wisdom that is clear and calm and just crystal clear about what you should do. And on the other side, you hear a voice called folly who is loud and obnoxious and makes promises to you about if you just take this shortcut, life is going to be that much sweeter and that much better. And I hope this week you took a few moments to stop. I hope when you were faced with a decision, you just took a moment to sit there and to listen to these two voices that called out to you so that you could tell them apart and that you could choose which one to listen to. Today, what we are going to talk about is once you know those two roads exist and once you know that you are on one of those two roads, we're going to talk about how to become wise. How to learn to follow this path called wisdom. How to be the kind of person the Bible calls a wise man or a wise woman. And we are going to do that this morning by watching the life and the story of a man named Solomon and seeing what God can teach us through that. That's where we're headed today. So how many of you had dads who like to give advice? How many of you had dads who at some point in time like to give you a little bit of advice about what you should do in this situation or what you should do if that was to happen to you, even if it wasn't necessarily asked for or wanted advice? I think if you were to stop for long enough, you could remember a whole bunch of things that your dad either did teach you or tried his very hardest to teach you. And I started to think about my dad and what he tried to teach me as I was growing up. And he would always try and pass on these little nuggets of wisdom. And one of those things that he tried to teach me from a very young age was always take care of your stuff. Parents, you ever tried to teach this to your kids before? Always take care of your stuff. Whenever I would buy something new, the first words out of my dad's mouth when I had unwrapped it is he would look me in the eye and would say, "Are you going to take care of that?" And I would say, "Yes, Dad." And then I would go fly my helicopter into the tree. When I get a new bike, a brand new bike, he would look at me and he'd look me in the eyes. He says, "Make sure you lock that up. Make sure you take care of that." And I'd say, "Of course, Dad, I'll lock that up." And then I would leave to go bike riding without my bike lock, off into the streets. Must have drove my dad completely nuts. It drove him so crazy once that he saw my bike parked in front of the corner store down the street from our house. He saw it unlocked. He saw me inside, nowhere near, and he stole my bike and brought it home. No word of a lie. He put it in the back of his truck. He drove it home. I walked out and saw an empty space where my bike used to be, and I panicked and I ran and I cried all the way home to tell my dad, "Dad, somebody stole my bike just like you said." And then I found out the thief was my father. And there I was sitting in the back of his truck. But you know why he did that? Is he was trying to teach me how to be wise. He's trying to teach me something that I wouldn't soon forget. He told me a whole bunch of things that I still remember. Whenever I was upset and worked up and I was mad at someone, if something had happened and I really wanted to go yell at someone, do you know what he made me do? He made me write a letter to that person that night and write whatever I wanted on it. And before I sent it, he said, "Go to sleep and see if you want to send it in the morning." So I would write this letter, and I would put every angry word I wanted into it. And he says, that's fine, write whatever you want, but in the morning you wake up, you read that through again, and you tell me if you want to send it. And if you have ever done this, you know that when you read that in the morning, you say, thank you, Jesus, that I did not send that letter. Thank you, Lord. You wonder how in the world you could have been that upset to write those words, but there was wisdom in that space and that time of sleeping it off. I remember also he used to try and teach me this simple little thing that most of you probably never had to have anybody remind you of. But when you get out of a vehicle that is on, make sure it's in drive before you get out, or before it's in park before you get out. See? You can see the problem that I've already had with this. It's a simple thing that you wouldn't think you'd have to remind anybody of. When the car is on, make sure it's in park before you open the door and get out. But when I was 14, I used to back the car out for my mom, and I put it back in drive so that I could inch up a few inches forward. Then I forgot to put it in park. I stepped out. The car drove right into the garage door right in front of me. So my dad would always remind me, what? Make sure it's in park before you get out. Make sure the vehicle is in a solitary motion before you open the door and get out. And the reason why I'm telling you all of these things is that every one of your fathers, no matter how hard they tried, they at some point tried to teach you a little bit of wisdom to make your life easier and to choose the right path as you go forward. They tried to teach you how to make sense of the decisions in your life and to choose the right path. And you know what? The entire book of Proverbs is exactly like that. The entire book of Proverbs is written from the context of a father who is sitting down his son, and he is saying to his son, son, listen to me. I have lived a lot of life. I have experienced a lot of situations. I have made my fair share of mistakes. And in all the places that I have been, this is what you need to know so that you don't have to make the mistakes that I made when I was your age. You don't have to pay the consequences. You don't have to keep paying tuition long after you graduate from high school. If you would just listen to me, I could save you from a world of heartache. Parents, how many of you have had these conversations with your kids before where you just sit them down and you just say, please, please listen to me. And they are off staring into the distance as you talk to them. Please, if you would just hear what I'm saying, this guy is no good for you. I know you can't see this right now, but this relationship is going to lead nowhere good. Please just listen to me that if you work hard in school now, I know you don't want to, I know you have 1,000 other things that you'd rather do, but if you just work hard now, you will thank me for the rest of your life. Please just listen to me. You see, if you read chapters 1 through 8 in the book of Proverbs, they all start with, or somewhere along the way, have a verse like this. Every single chapter goes like this. Chapter 1 says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Chapter 2 says, my son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you. Chapter 3, my son, do not forget my teaching, and on and on and on it goes. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The whole book of Proverbs is Solomon, the wisest man on earth, sitting down with his son saying, listen to me. Because this is actually the heart of God. This is what God is trying to do with you and I through the book of Proverbs. He's saying, listen to me. I want what's best for you. God really does want what's best for you, and He knows where each path in life leads. He knows which ones lead off a cliff. He knows which ones lead to an oasis in the middle of a desert, and He says, listen to me. I want to give you a map for life so that you will be safe and protected and that you will find the good things in the future that I have made you for. It's the heart of God to want the best for you and me, to avoid the danger and to choose the right path. Now, I was thinking about that this week, and I was thinking about how, as a culture, you and I don't like anyone to tell us what to do we? As a culture, we don't want anyone to tell us where to go. We don't want anyone to tell us what to say or what to do. We want to make all of our own decisions ourselves. And I was just thinking about that, and I realized something. I realized that, you know what? No one ever says that or feels that way when they're on safari. Have any of you ever been on safari before? Maybe some of you. Nobody ever says things like this when they're on safari. Nobody, when they are walking through a jungle infested with lions and tigers and all kinds of dangerous creatures, nobody looks at the guide and says to the guide, don't tell me what to do. Don't you tell me where to go. I will decide where I want to go. I will decide what path is best for me. Don't you dare try and tell me where I am supposed to walk. Does anybody do that on safari? Not twice anyways, right? Like that's not a repeat experience. What do they say? They say, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I don't want to get eaten by a lion, sir. Thank you. What I'm trying to tell you by all of this is the truth is the world that we live in right now is every bit as dangerous as any jungle in Africa. The world we live in right now is fraught with so many hidden dangers that you and I have no way of knowing unless we had lived 1,000 lifetimes. And God has given us His Word, and God has given us a map for life so that we don't have to make every mistake. We can learn from the mistakes that others have made and the truth that He has given us to find the path of life. And this is what's happening in the book of Proverbs, is God is laying out a map in front of you saying, if you follow this map, you will find good things and you will avoid all kinds of heartache and danger. Now, the story of Proverbs actually begins long before we ever get to Proverbs chapter 1. And the passage that we're going to be in today, before we dive deep into the book of Proverbs this summer, is 1 Kings chapter 3. And this is the story of how Solomon got his wisdom in the first place. And it's an incredible story. We are going to read it together this morning because what I want to do today is I want to show you from Scripture how Solomon became wise. And if we are wise enough to follow in his footsteps, how you and I can become wise too. So much of that comes through Solomon's story of how he became the wisest man on earth. So let's read this through together. 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people, however, were still sacrificing at the high places, because the temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense in the high places. The king, Solomon, went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon answered, "You have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this great kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. Now, Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, "Since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you the wise and discerning heart that you have asked for, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will ever there be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life." Now, every time I read this story, it blows me away. Every time I read this story, there is this fresh sense of awe about it for me. And I just think, I want you just for a second this morning, I want you to put yourself in the position that Solomon was in. I want you to imagine just with me for a moment here, if it was late at night one night, you were all by yourself, and God himself appears to you. God, the very creator of all that there is, appears before you and he says this, "Ask me for whatever you want. Ask me for whatever you want and I will give it to you." Can you picture that with me? At night it's just you and there is nobody else there. You are standing there and the God of the universe shows up and he just says, "Ask me for whatever you want and I will give it to you." Now, if you watched movies like I did, if you grew up watching movies like I did called Aladdin, or if you've seen movies with genies, you might be prepared for a situation like this. Like if you had ever been in a situation or thought, if I could ever have one wish, what would that be? And God actually appears to Solomon and he gives him this exact same question. And this is my kids' favorite question around the dinner table this year. I don't know why, but they look at us, they look at mom and dad, and they say, "If you could have just one thing, what would it be?" They want to get to know us. They want to know what's deep inside us. They say, "Mom and Dad, if you could just have one thing in life right now, one wish, what would it be?" And if we ever say anything too biblical or too holy, they say, no, not like that. Like, what do you really want? If we ever say something like everyone in the world to come and follow Jesus, they say, "No, yeah, but other than that, what do you really want?" And so this isn't a story. This isn't some movie. This is the God of the universe that appears before King Solomon one-on-one, and he says to him, if you could have anything that I would give you, what would you want? Standing there asking you this. I want to ask you this morning, what would you ask for if this was you? Honestly, if God gave you this blank check, what would you ask for this morning? Would you want money? Would you want fame? Would you want accomplishments? Would you want a long life? Would you want a different boss at work? Would you want the Leafs to win a Stanley Cup? What impossible thing would you ask the living God for in this life? What would you choose? Do you know what Solomon asked for? Do you know what he did with that blank check? Do you know what he asked the living God for with anything at his disposal? He asked for wisdom. Solomon asks God of all the things that he could have chosen, of all the things that he could have asked, he asked God for wisdom. And for most of us, not only would that not have made our top 100 or top 10, it wouldn't have even been on the map of things that we would have asked God for. And Solomon is likely 20 years old at this point. I want you to imagine back when you were 20. I'll give you some time to do that for those of you that's a longer way to go. I want you to imagine back when you were 20 years old and you were given a blank check of anything that you wanted in this world. Here's a 20-year-old man that says to God, God, I want wisdom. I want a discerning heart. I want to know the difference between right and wrong. I want to know the difference between the right path and the wrong one. He is a young king with so many subjects. He knows that on his own, he doesn't have what it takes to govern these people, so he asks God for the thing that he thinks is the most valuable of all the options available to him. And I believe that if I could have seen God's face right now, there would have been a smile ear to ear when Solomon asked him this. Of all the things that he could have chosen, God would have been thrilled beyond all elements because his son, his servant Solomon, asked him for the most important thing. He asked him for wisdom. And so God says to him, he says, since you have asked for this, not for long life or wealth for yourself or for the death of your enemies, I will even give you what you have not asked for, riches and honor, so that in your lifetime there will be no equal among kings. God says, because you have chose this, I will give you all the things that you didn't ask for. And then Solomon's dream and his vision ends. God often appeared to people in dreams and visions. And after this interaction is over and God granted him the request that he had asked, and Solomon became, in that moment, the wisest man who had ever walked the planet other than Jesus Christ himself. Now, you and I may never have an encounter with God like the one that Solomon did. Just in case, if I were you, I would go home and figure out what your answer would be, because you never know, right? You never know what's going to happen tonight, and Solomon wasn't expecting this, so maybe have an answer ready just in case. But you and I may never have an experience with God like the one that Solomon had, but I want you to know this morning that the option that he gave him, the invitation to wisdom that he offered Solomon, is the one that he is offering you and me even today. God is offering you this right here in this room, that if you want to become wise, he will give you wisdom. And this morning, I want to share with you 3 things that you can do, 3 things that anyone can do regardless of intelligence, regardless of IQ, regardless of where you did or didn't go to school. 3 things that you can do to become a wise man or a wise woman. 3 things that we can learn from Solomon's story. The first step for anyone who wants to become wise is this: pray for it. To pray for him. The very first and fundamental step for anybody that wants to become a wise man or a wise woman is to ask God for it, to ask him to give you wisdom. Proverbs chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 says this: if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, if you look for it as silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. If you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding. James 1:5 echoes the exact same thing, and he does so with a promise. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should what? If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God for it. And do you know what he says next? He says this. He says, God who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. God who gives generously to everyone, no matter age or race or gender. God who gives this wisdom generously to all those who ask, and it will be given to you. And this is the story of Solomon. This is a story of a man who asked for wisdom and God gave it to him. And if you want to become wise, there is nothing I could tell you more important this morning than step number one, and that is to pray for it and to ask Him for it. And it could look as simple as something like this. Every day this summer, you could pray the same prayer that goes something like this: God, give me wisdom. God, make me wise. Wake up in the morning, and next morning you ask the same question: God, give me wisdom and make me wise. If you knew my testimony, you would know that so many things in my life happened from one sentence prayers that I prayed over and over again for a period of months. And if you prayed a prayer like this, God would hear it and answer it. God, give me wisdom. Every day say, God, I need wisdom, and you have it. Would you give it to me? How many of you know that there are some prayers that you can pray that God will never say no to? Did you know that? There are some prayers that you can pray that God will never, ever, ever say no to. God will never say maybe. God will never say maybe if you wait a little while. There are some prayers that you can pray that every single time, always and forever, the answer will be yes. And this prayer is one of those prayers that if you ask for wisdom, there will never be a time that God says no. If you ask for it, He will give it to you. Now, I'll give you a little disclaimer here. That doesn't mean it happens all instantaneously. You don't ask one day for wisdom and all of a sudden become a fully wise person. It's not like a download that you get and it happens in 3 minutes or less. It is a lifetime of application and intention and pursuit. But if you ask for it, I will make you this promise, because God Himself makes it, that He will give it to you. Now, the reason why this step is so critical is that most people who do end up going searching for wisdom, they end up searching in all the wrong places. If people search for wisdom at all this day and age, which is not a very popular thing, most of them will go searching in all of the wrong places, and you will never find wisdom if you don't know where to look. And if you ask our culture today where to find wisdom, do you know where they tell you to look? Well, the internet, yeah, that's a good answer. Google. Google is the answer to most questions. But if you ask our culture where to find wisdom, where to know what to do you know what most people will say? They will say inside you. If you need to find wisdom, you need to look deep inside, and you need to get rid of all those other voices that are clouding your ability to hear yourself. You got to get rid of all those other distractions and just listen to the voice inside you, and it will lead you to the place where you need to go. I can't tell you how many Facebook quotes I have seen this week alone that testify to that. And if they don't tell you to look inside, do you know where they tell you to look? To the universe. They tell you to listen to the universe. How in the world does one do that? If anyone can answer that for me, I would like you to after the service. How do you listen to a ball of gas and matter? They tell you to look inside, or they tell you to look way out there. Do you know what Solomon says? Solomon says, no, you don't look inside, you look up. You don't look inside yourself, you don't look ambiently around you, you look to the one who has and created wisdom, and you ask Him for it, because that is where wisdom is found. And if you look in the wrong places, you never will find them. Wisdom comes from God. It is a gift of God. It is from His hand and through His Spirit. And if you want it, you need to ask for it, because no amount of life experience, no amount of situations, no amount of Google searches will ever give you the wisdom that only God can. And this is why you must ask. You must pray. Pray for wisdom. Ask God a question that He will never say no to. That's step number one, is to pray for it. Step number two is to prize wisdom, to prize it. What Solomon's Choice tells us is not only did he want wisdom, but he wanted it more than other things in his life. He wanted it more than money, more than fame, more than long life. It wasn't just that he wanted wisdom, he wanted it more, and he prized it in his heart. And if you want to become wise, it actually has to become a priority in your life. It can't be just a thing that you flippantly pray. It actually has to be a priority that you are willing to prize and to search for. It is one thing to say to God, God, yes, I want wisdom. It's quite another to want it more than other things in your life. Now, I've shared this with you before, but I want to remind you of a story that means a lot to me. When Mel and I were first dating, we met at Bible college. And when we met at Bible college, there wasn't a lot of places for us to get to know each other. There was just a few common areas, and all of them closed by supper time. So you had to head back to your dorms. It was not a co-ed environment. Bible college is a different world than university in more ways than one. And so if we wanted to get to know one another, we had to go somewhere else. And so we went for walks, and we went out into the wilderness. This was in the country. And so we would go for walks through the trails day after day, and we would just talk to one another, and we would get to know one another. And eventually we found this clearing in the middle of the forest where somebody who must have been in a situation like us before had put a couch. An old couch in the middle of the wilderness, just sitting there in a clearing for two people to sit down and talk to one another. Or it was a miracle. It was one of those two things. God obviously wanted us to get together. Now, I went to Bible college in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is cold. So there's no amen. So none of you have ever been there before. But Winnipeg is almost always cold. And this was fall, and it was getting to be really cold in the evenings. And we used to sit out there and talk, and sometimes the snow would fall and settle on us as we talked late into the night. We would sit out there for hours, completely freezing. And one night, I was so cold, talked to her for so long that my legs froze stiff, and I couldn't bend at the knees. And I had to walk a kilometer home like the Tin Man. And then I had to spend an hour in front of a radiator just trying to thaw out, hopefully to get my knee movement back, hoping that this wasn't permanent. And I tell you this story only to tell you this. Don't get me wrong, I like to be warm. Don't get me wrong, I like to be indoors rather than outdoors on a cold Winnipeg night. But you know what? I wanted to talk to Mel more. Do you understand that? I wanted something more than comfort. I wanted something more than pleasantry. It was worth it to freeze half to death. I wish she was here to hear all of the things I went through to be with her. You can all tell her about it afterwards. I'm fine with that. I wanted that more. This is what it means to prize something. This is what it means to prize it, to want it more than anything else in that moment in your life. And if you want to be wise, it is not just lip service. It is not just a prayer that you pray. You actually have to prize it and value it and seek it and search for it so that you will find it. Proverbs 8:10 says this, "Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold." Do you see the bolded words there? Choose my it's not actually bolded in the scriptures, I did that. Choose my instruction instead of silver and knowledge rather than choice gold. I want to do something with you that a seminary prof did. I want you to imagine you're in a room all by yourself. You're in a room and there are 3 tables laid out in front of you. One table on the left-hand side is covered in gold bars and jewels as high as you can pile this table. It is covered with more shiny things than you will ever experience or see in your entire life, and it makes the crown jewels look like children's jewelry. And then on table number 2 in the middle, you have all sorts of accomplishments. You have college degrees. You have a diploma from Harvard or a degree from Harvard. You have newspaper articles written about the life that you lived and the amazing things that you did. You have a table full of accomplishments. And then on that third table, you have a table full of wisdom. You have a table full of books and knowledge and direction from God. If you were in this room right now and that man, the richest man in the world, gave you the choice, which one of these 3 things would you like? Which one would you choose? It's kind of telling, isn't it? You know what you want to say, right? All of you want to say wisdom right now because you know this whole message is on wisdom, but half of you are like, I don't know. I like shiny things. I don't know. I like newspaper articles. Fame is kind of cool. I don't know which one I would take. Books and wisdom. Why in the world would I want to take that? Solomon says that if you are ever faced with this choice, you choose the table of wisdom and you never look back. Because he says it is more valuable than anything else that you could ask for or imagine. Some of you may be sitting there in your early 20s or in your teens and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know about this. You're not quite convinced. You're thinking that if I was faced with this kind of a choice, no way I'm choosing wisdom. I get that wisdom is kind of important, but come on, is it really more valuable than gold and rubies? Let's get serious here. And what I want to tell you is something that I learned from Tim Keller, and this is what he says about why wisdom is so valuable. He says, because it is more costly not to have. Wisdom is more costly not to have. He says it will cost you more in life not to have it. And the whole quote goes like this. The message of Proverbs is clear. Never give up on your pursuit of wisdom. Do absolutely anything you can to give it, whatever it costs you. Why? Because it is more costly not to have. You will make decisions that lead to one difficulty and disaster after another. So do whatever it takes. Prize it. Prize it. Solomon says, wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you can desire can compare with her. And if you don't believe that, ask God to give you a revelation so that you can understand it. Then you can prize it. And the third thing that you can do and that you should do if you want to become wise is to pursue it. The third step that anyone can take to become wise is to pursue wisdom. And this is what Solomon was saying in the verse that we read earlier. If you look for wisdom as for silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Look for it as silver and search for it as hidden treasure. Are you noticing a theme in Solomon's words about wisdom? He's picking the things that you and I value more than anything else and telling you that wisdom is more valuable than this. These are powerful images of pursuit. And I'll give you one last thing to imagine. We're talking a lot about imaginary money today. Many of you wish it would be less imaginary and more real, but today we'll talk about imaginary riches. So if you own your own home, if you found out one day that the owner before you was a wealthy man, a fabulously rich man, like Rockefeller kind of rich, and you found out that he buried treasure somewhere on your property, what would you do as soon as you got home? How many of you would still go to Burns? Not a lot, right? What would you do if you found out the man who lived at your house before you was the richest man in all of Canada, but he didn't trust banks and he kept everything that he owned in gold bullion, and he kept it in this beautiful ornate treasure chest that he bought at some auction somewhere, and before the man died, without telling anybody where it was, he buried it somewhere under your property, or maybe in the back 40 for all you farmers there. Somewhere on your property is a treasure that is more valuable than anyone that has ever been discovered before. What would you be doing tonight? How many of you would go home and watch TV? Not a lot of you, right? Not a lot of you go and check the sports scores and wonder what you're going to do tomorrow morning. Do you know what you'd be doing? You'd be doing the same thing that I would. There would be azaleas flying in every direction across your backyard. There wouldn't be a zucchini left in your garden. There would be tomato plants flying from one end to the other, and you furiously searching for this treasure that you have just found out is somewhere within your reach. That if you can just find it, you will be wealthy beyond all measure. This is the image that Solomon is painting here, is if you understood how valuable wisdom was, you would pursue it like that. You would search for it like that. You wouldn't wait on it. You wouldn't do other things in the meantime. You would pursue it with all that you had, because wisdom really is that valuable. How do we do this? How do we search for wisdom? How do we pursue it? I want to give you a few options and a few different ways to do that. How do you go searching for wisdom? I will give you the number one place that you should start. You should start looking for it right here. If you want wisdom, the number one place that you can go, the thing that has more wisdom to offer you in your life and every situation that you come across, is found right here in the pages of this book. There never has been written, nor ever will there be written, that has the ability to make you wiser than the inch and a half that I am holding here in my hands. And if you're real spiritual, you have even thicker Bible at home. There is nothing that you can do that will make you more wise than to spend your time reading this book. You need to consume it. You need to memorize it. You need to chew on it and wrestle with it and study it and talk about it with other people, because these are the very words of the living God himself, endowed with the power to make you wise. So pursuing wisdom means that you read the words that are written in this book and that you don't rush through it. I think that's the greatest weakness for those of us that do regularly read the Word, is that we rush through it. Trust me, I was in Bible college and we read through this whole book in 8 months and 2 semesters, and there were days that I could log 15 pages worth of reading and not tell you a single thing that I had just read. It's how most of you read book reports in high school. I could go through and I had to check it off at the end of the month and say I had read this book and I had read this book, and I flew through the book of Jeremiah faster than anybody ever has been through the book of Jeremiah in history. And do you know what happened when I was done? Do you know how much I learned? Almost nothing. Almost nothing. Do you know why? Because I flew through it. If you want to absorb what the Bible has to say and the truth that's inside it, you have to spend unhurried time in the Word. You have to meditate. You got to chew on it. The scriptural passages talk about chewing the cud and absorbing it inside you. You got to spend unhurried time in the Word. And some of you, you do read your devotions, and I think that's amazing. You read the Word in the morning, but you rush through it, and you are out the door before you've even had a chance to let it sink in. So if you want to become wise, you want to pursue wisdom, you got to read the Word, and you got to read it slowly. You see, wisdom takes effort. You got to dig in. And I know that life is busy. I know that there are 1,000 things that you could and should be doing. I know that there is a ton of candy that needs crushing. Life is full of all sorts of important things. But if you want to become wise, you got to prioritize it and you got to pursue it. You got to dig into the Word. And if you are willing to do so, God will honor that. You can search for it by reading books that people have written about the truth. When I was 16 years old, I found a man named C.S. Lewis. You got to find your dead authors. Everybody needs a few dead authors, and he's mine. And at 16 years old, I found a man who opened my eyes to a world of truth and wisdom that I had never seen before. And the minute I read one, I couldn't stop. I found another, and I found another, and I found another. And I grew in leaps and bounds during those high school years because I found a taste for truth and a taste for wisdom, and I found somebody who had it. Find an author like that and read everything you can on them. If you miss a Sunday, and everybody has legitimate reasons once in a while for doing that, one Sunday every 10 years is acceptable. If you ever were to miss that one Sunday every 10 years, go online afterwards and find out what you missed. Find out what the word was preached that Sunday. Track with where your church is going. Stay on track. Or maybe find a podcast that you can get used to where somebody is teaching you about the truth. Somebody who points you towards Jesus, and watch it in the car on the way to work. There are so many sources of wisdom out there that are grounded in the Word and people who will teach you about it. Find those people and latch on because they will help you become wise. Wisdom comes from the Word of God and from those who teach the Word. But just like treasure that is hidden in a mine, you got to go digging for it. You got to make time for it. And the last thing I'll share with you this morning, the last thing that you can do, John Piper says this, the absolute last essential thing that you must do if you want wisdom is to come to Jesus. If you want to be wise, you must come to Jesus. Jesus said to the people of his day in the Gospels, the queen of the south, the queen of Sheba will arise at the judgment of this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and yet someone greater than Solomon is here. Solomon spoke God's wisdom. Jesus is the wisdom of God. Other people have spoken truth. Jesus is the truth. Other people have offered you ways of understanding God, but Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And other people have given you promises that God has made, but Jesus, in Him, all the promises of God find their yes in Him. Other people have wisdom, but Jesus is the sum and total, hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So if wisdom is what you want, then you need to come to Jesus. You need to turn your life over to Him. You need to make the choice to follow Him because you will not find wisdom without Him. If understanding is what you need, if a direction is what you need, then you need to come to Jesus. He is the one who can give it to you. He is the one who can give it to you. Read the Word, consume good teaching, and come to Jesus. All I want to do to close today is I want to issue a challenge to you. All of the faithful who come on a long weekend, I always tell you that God takes note of people who show up on a long weekend. I want to issue a challenge, and I'm going to repeat this the next time I get together with the church, and this is what I want you to do. I want to challenge you to read through the book of Proverbs with me this summer. All of you have summer reading, or most of you have summer reading. Some of you do online. Proverbs is 31 chapters. If you are willing to devote half a chapter a day, I'm not even going to make you read a whole chapter every day. Half a chapter every day when you are sitting in the sunshine, basking in the beauty of God's creation. As you are lying in a hammock this summer by the pool, whatever you do, half a chapter a day. Can we do this together as a church and give God space and time to make us wise as a body of believers? Will you do that with me? Will you take that challenge? And if you are really brave, if you want extra bonus points, I want you to pick one verse each day that meant something to you, because Proverbs is not a book that you can just power through. Pick one of those one-liners, one of those two-sentence Proverbs that Solomon says, and just write it down somewhere and post it in your house or in your wallet. Just carry it with you and think on that one thing throughout the day. Give God time and space to give you wisdom and let it seep. You got to steep in it. You know how you steep tea? You got to steep yourself in truth. Pick one of those verses and think about it for the rest of the day. How many of you are willing to do that with me this summer? Let's get real brave. How many of you are willing to take this challenge on with me? Now look around you. These are all witnesses. I promise you this, if you do this with me and you pay attention as we read and as we preach this summer, you will not be the same person when September hits. You will not make decisions the same way. You will not think about God the same way. You will not think about your life and your family and the gifts that He has given you the same way. If you are willing to give Him time, if you're willing to pray for it, to prize it, and to pursue it, God will reward you with riches well beyond any shiny thing that you can ever lay your eyes on. And that's His promise to you. Let's pray. God, we are going to do this collectively, the thing that you ask us to do individually this morning, and we are going to say this, and you can just agree with me in your hearts. God, give us wisdom. God, make us wise. What we need, you have, and so we're asking you to give it to us. And I pray that you would bless this entire church as we dig deep into the book of Proverbs this summer, and that you would hold true to your promise that those of us who ask you for wisdom, Father, will receive it, and will become wise. In the name of the one who is the wisdom that we seek and who is the voice that we should follow, we pray. Amen.